proof.
Sparky.com.
Sparky.com.
Stew Yapping Part 3, Take 2.
Welcome back, everybody, for episode 3 here on Shape Shorts on the Illiad. If you've been able to stand the first two, you're almost done.
Yay!
We got an audience we paid for. Tony paid for it. I wouldn't do that, but that's when Tony's on, you guys can take it up with him. What I want to do today, I want us to actually start talking about the Illiad itself. Let's take a look at the story. I'm not going to go through the whole story in a 15-minute one. That's not possible. What I want to do, though, is talk about something about the introduction of the story. And I want to read it to you rather than trust to how I may ad-lib, make up, or whatever it may be of the actual words. And here, this is how the story of Troy opens up in the Iliad. Sing, goddess, the anger of Peleus' son Achilles and its devastation, which put pains 1,000-fold upon the Achaeans, hurled in their multitudes to the house of Hades strong souls of heroes, but gave their bodies to the delicate feasting of dogs of all birds. And the will of Zeus was accomplished since that time, when first there stood in division of conflict Atreus' son, the lord of men, the brilliant Achilles. Now, I want you to think about that introduction. It's not an abstraction. There's no abstraction here. We talk about these stories. We often put them out there as it doesn't affect you. What's the first thing brought up in here? Anger. The Iliad opens with rage and anger. Anger. It's not an abstraction to anybody out there. I want all of you to think to yourself, when was the last time you were really angry? How many of you have felt almost uncontrollable rage? A rage that at some level, and there may be some therapists out there think I need help, but this is another issue. How many of you felt that rage and at some level it's like a drug? It's almost enjoyable. One thing has happened when you feel rage. You live in the moment. It's what often gets you in trouble. You have no thought of yesterday or tomorrow. You're living in that moment. You have this uncontrollable rage about this. Everyone out there, I don't care who you are, has felt rage. I felt it. We don't talk about it, you don't have this, unless you're on a Seinfeld episode where he had rageaholics. But you don't have, it's one of those unpleasant things. We all want to be happy, want to be nice to each other. But you feel rage. To be blunt, when someone cuts you off in a car, you're already in a bad mood. What do you feel for that moment? What do you want to happen to that person? You don't have to tell me or anybody in the room with you. You already know the answer, and so do I. But you know what that feels like for a moment. Imagine if that's your story. And I'm going to bring this up here because the story of the Iliad is a story of Achilles. He's been turned into some kind of pop culture hero. And yet by Achilles' own words, he's a coward. Oh, he's good at killing people. He can do that all day long. That's what he does. He's a good warrior. He does this. But does he really want to be there? He had nothing to do with Helen. He never competed for Helen. He didn't have anything to do with her. Why is he there? He doesn't want to be there. He doesn't like it. He gets in, and the rage is not just directed at Trojans. It's often mostly directed at himself and to the Achaeans. We call them the Greeks here. He directs it at them. Agamemnon, he can't stand. He cannot stand the sight of Agamemnon. Here's a man who is your commander in a military situation, and you hate him. You find him pompous. You find everything about him disgusting. And in a one-on-one combat, you'd kill him in a second. He's not going to do that. And yet, this idiot is there. And what are you doing? You're rescuing Helen from what? How do you know she doesn't like Paris? Maybe that's where she belongs. Menelaus was stupid enough to leave her there. That's Menelaus' problem. Why am I here fighting a war? And what it brings up, how many times throughout human history have people been in armies fighting wars? They don't even know why they're there. It's part of the game. It's part of the fight. You join the war. You do this. How many soldiers throughout history, once they're in combat, say, I'm not fighting for my country. I'm fighting for my comrades. I'm fighting for the guys in my platoon. If you look at the Illiad, Achilles finally fights Trojan because of the loss of his friend Patroclus. He doesn't care about the Achilles. He could care less about Helen. None of that matters. How many times throughout human history have we had this? Now, I'm going to bring this up about war because the Trojan War is gross. Homer does nothing to hide what war can be. He talks about spears getting jutted into someone's face and cutting their face apart, while the guy holding the spear lifts them up like a fish on the end of a wire. You know what you're getting into. Homer knows it. This is war in its ugliest form. There's no attempt to hide it. Yeah. But why is Achilles a coward? Well, for Achilles, what he really wants, he doesn't want to be in this stupid war. I don't care about Helen. It's an idiotic war anyway. If I had my way, I'd kill Agamemnon and go home. I don't have any problem killing Agamemnon. In fact, he even tells Agamemnon on one thing, why would I kill Trojans? I got nothing against them. I got problems with you. That's my problem. I don't care about Trojans. They never injured me. Why would I care about a Trojan? How many times has that been part of history? Talk to anybody that's in combat, you're going to see similar stories. And what is this cowardice? Achilles asks himself in one part of the Iliad, how am I a coward? Wouldn't it be better to live 100 years in obscurity than 5 years and known forever? Which would be preferable to me? And he says 100 years in obscurity. But I'm too much of a coward to do that. What Achilles is telling you is he's too much of a coward to be what he wants to be. Farm his grapes. He doesn't want anything else. And yet, he is the greatest warrior the Achaeans have ever known. It's a talent and trade he hates. He doesn't like who he is. This is a part of a story that speaks to everyone, no matter who you are and where you are. You've all known people, maybe yourselves, where you have seen yourself, you have a talent that you really don't like. It's not something for you. You felt the rage and anger. But how much of the rage and anger is at yourself for not being true to who you really are? Achilles' rage ultimately goes into something else. He's not who he wants to be. When he finally goes on a killing spree after Patroclus' death, it's insane. It's so bad that even the Achaeans say, hey, he's a little off the wall. They don't even want the Trojans to know they're participating. How many times has that happened in the history of warfare? When we put a human into those kind of things, how much do we really make them into a human? How much of their humanity disappears? How many of us who have ever been in combat really wish we had this? We understand Achilles. We understand his problem. Maybe we should have all gone home too. There's nothing here for us except death, suffering, and dying. For what? To rescue Menelaus' wife, Helen? What, are you kidding me? I could care less. I don't care. Most beautiful woman in the world? Well, who cares about that? Beautiful, you can have him all the time. What does he care? It doesn't mean anything to him. And yet he's there. And yet he fulfills his destiny and dies at Troy from an arrow from the most cowardly of warriors, Paris. He is killed by the coward. Think about that for a minute. The absolute irony of that. And we would think it's a coward killing a hero. But maybe if Achilles is right, it's a coward killing a coward. Maybe, just maybe, Achilles has Paris, Homer has Paris kill him because at heart, we know what Achilles actually is. Achilles, more than us, knows what he is. He knows that he is a coward. And This is where the story speaks to the modern reader. This is, again, what makes it a classic. It's not obsolete. You don't have to be a warrior to know when you don't do what you know you should have done. When you backed off for some superficial, silly reason, maybe your friends are doing it, maybe something else, maybe family pressure, but you did what you knew to be wrong and you did it anyway, and before you did it, you knew you shouldn't do it. That's a human story. I would suspect every one of us out there has done exactly that at some point in our existence. And that, if we're honest with ourselves, is the voice of Achilles speaking to us. The voice of Achilles speaking to us 2,800 to 3,000 plus years ago, saying to us, don't be me. Don't do what I did. When I first got fascinated with the story of Troy, this was the part that fascinated me more than anything else. This war story is nice. You hear nice little clever stories about a Trojan horse later. That's all interesting. Other than that, there's stories like this. But how does this man end up there? And once again, does it matter whether he ever existed? No. Absolutely doesn't matter. The voice speaks to you no matter what. If we listen deep inside of us, is there all the time, warning us of what becomes of us when we don't do what we know to be right, when we choose fame and fortune over what we really want. Fame, Achilles gets fame all right. He gets exactly what he does. He gets dead. That's the reward for fame. Maybe think about it. And think about Achilles' question. Is it better to live 100 years in obscurity doing exactly what you want, or 5 years as a hero and dying? Which would you prefer? And it brings up another question. We always look around. How long have people lived? I want to be remembered. I want to really get remembered. Or is the only difference between me and Achilles the time it takes for both of us to get forgotten? Is that the only difference between us? And if that's the case, what difference does it make? But one of the lessons that I personally got out of this is that every human, you have to live to be what you are, or you end up destroyed by one of the worst. The anger of Achilles destroys him. Anger is a drug, and anger, like every good drug, is destructive. Sooner or later, it will kill you. Achilles' anger destroys him. Now, before I go, I want to recommend something to people here. A lot of people have read the Trojan War, but one of the best books about this, The War That Killed Achilles, by Carolyn Alexander. I would recommend that anybody who is interested in the story of Troy read this book. And one of the subtitles of this, what are the real lessons of war? And she titles this The True Story of Homer's Iliad and the Trojan War. It's a classic book, one of the better books ever written about the Trojan War. And I would recommend, even if you've never read the Iliad, read this first. It'll give you an insight into a lot of the things that I had said, and what you can expect as a human being to learn from this story. Are you living true to who you really want to be? And are the people pushing you off a bunch of Agamemnons? Is there an Agamemnon everywhere telling you what to do, how to behave? That's really, to be blunt, an idiot. Someone who you just don't want to be near, but for whatever cultural, social reason, you have to listen to? Do you have the courage to say to them, no more. I will listen to you no more. I'm done. And that is when a classic becomes a contemporary work. When you do that, you absorb that classic and you realize it speaks to me today in the 21st century. Maybe not as a culture, but if I read it, I can see that as part of who and what is the culture and the place I live in. And once again, this isn't about how anybody else judges you. It ultimately becomes, as Achilles, how did you judge yourself? I want to thank you for listening, and next up, good luck, Tony Patuco. And he'll have a real special lecture on science and the I-6, and a little more modern history and science, math, and history. Anyway, thanks again for listening.
now we're going to discuss a little bit about episode
Well,
3.
they made it through episode 3 with it. We're here.
And you know what? The students actually stayed.
I know.
I don't.
We know why they stayed.
I paid him.
No, Sparky made them.
Oh, okay.
He locked the door.
He must have locked
There's
the
a
door.
bunch of them piled up against the door, but
Okay.
that's still technically staying.
Well, at least they're here.
Yeah.
That's the important part.
Hey,
well,
shut up over there.
In our summary, though, now when you brought in episode 3, you really brought in all 6
Mhm.
of the inspirational 6. And again, just to recoup, to animate, originate, rejuvenate, stimulate, Deus ex machina, and to tell the story. Animate again was to bring life to the classroom, right, and to make these connections. And so you started out with anger and Achilles' anger, and that's what drives Homer. And Achilles, as you were speaking, is the story of Troy, not
Mhm.
Troy. It's really Achilles, right? Um,
Well, it's what the introduction says. The anger is the rage of Achilles that drives the story.
Exactly. And but then in animation, you talk a lot about war, which is a reality.
Mhm.
We can't hide from it. We don't like to, and you brought that up. We don't like to think about it. It's a horrible thing, but it's a reality we have to live with. And the idea that the goal of Achilles was really in your discussion in animation was to kill Agamemnon. If
He didn't like it.
he didn't like it. If he was gone, his problem's over.
Yeah, go home.
And you go home. The notion that you brought in, the notion of Menelaus and Helen, Menelaus being the weakened brother of Agamemnon, and Helen, not who we think Helen is. Is that correct?
Not the great beauty. No.
No.
Helen, the one who ran off with Paris.
So, yeah, exactly.
She tried to pretend it was.
Yeah, there was no kidnapping here,
No.
mostly thing. All that you bring in class becomes very important to animate the subject in this context. And also, in animation, when you bring in the point, would you rather live as a hero, right,
For a short term.
for a short term, or live a life in this
In
context?
obscurity.
In obscurity. And that question will be raised over and over again historically.
Yeah.
This all brings stimulation in the classroom. Origination, you started out the talk with reading the intro, which brings out, this is the story of the anger of Achilles.
Mhm.
And that first line says it all.
Speak, O muses of the rage of
It
Achilles.
does not start by saying, oh, this is a story of Troy. It doesn't say that. No. So we recognize right away that in the first line, once you read it, and this, by the way, you do this, when I taught humanities, and you taught humanities, I always had them read the book first before I gave any discussion on it. The first lecture would come in the syllabus, read even the first stanza,
Yeah,
which sets the stage, and we begin that way, bringing out the idea that there is a rage in Achilles, as an anger in Achilles, and we all know that, we can empathize. That's all part of
And he
rejuvenation.
angers at himself.
Adds at himself, and that's usually what it amounts to, right? Or anger. The notion of rejuvenation, of course, is bringing to life war and what we know of it and what we experienced it. Is war today the same as it was then? And you said probably not through the lenses that we have.
But even in combat today, you talk to veterans, they don't fight for the country, they fight for their company. They fight for the platoon,
For the,
for the guy next to him.
exactly, it's
The other's an abstraction.
it's a family and a brotherhood, a sisterhood, and so on that is combined, connected.
And that's, I think, what was important there. That's ultimately what brings Achilles into the war, the death of his friend.
Exactly.
Nothing about
No,
Troy,
yeah,
none of that nonsense.
Exactly. It was, and why he struggled so hard with that
Mhm.
was his love of his friend in this context. You brought in stimulation, the modern examples of rage, which is interesting because when a student hears about rage, they think about rage over here.
Mhm.
They don't think about rage over here.
Yeah.
And you bring in the modern examples of rage and what it amounts to, all part of stimulating the student. And then there was very good in stimulation as well that Achilles really had the rage for himself because he did not like the kill. He did not like war. He didn't like it. But that was his talent.
Yeah.
His talent, based upon the gods, was that he was going to be this,
Mhm.
whether he liked it or not.
Mhm.
And how many talents that we really don't like? We'd rather do this our talent happens to be here. I'm good at.
Well, it's an old thing I brought, well, I thought it's always interesting. Someone always teaches someone in school, follow your talents. What if you hate your talents?
Yeah, exactly.
And what if your talents are negative?
Exactly,
I
exactly.
mean, nobody really
And,
talks about that.
And we used to bring this up a lot in class about how that one famous phrase, a child is asked, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Mhm.
And the question should be, what problem do you want to solve? In other
Yeah.
words, what talent do you want to express? That's all part of stimulation. Um, Deus Ex Machina is loaded with
Mhm.
the idea of how to solve problems in an unorthodox way. Achilles is killed by Paris, and it's a solution. But what solution? Paris, the weaker, kills Achilles, the stronger.
And what always got to be about that story, Paris kills the greatest warrior, who in his own mind is the greatest coward. So in his own mind, the greatest coward kills the greatest coward.
Exactly.
There's that dichotomy.
The dichotomy, and you bring that. You might not even see it in the story as you read it, but
Yeah.
that's what we do in a classroom.
Yeah.
The voice of Achilles is brought out very nicely in this one. The voice of Achilles is what we think he hears, and what we hear. And to finish off, uh, when you told the story, Achilles and Troy and the Iliad is the story.
Mhm.
And I think you brought it out very nicely. I think does that summarize?
Yeah, summarize it. And I think for everybody out there, if you looked at this, you can see once you've thought of it, we've said it. How many of you have already done this? May not be in the 6 we've set up here,
Mhm.
but you've done it. But also, it is, I'm going to use it blunt, it's part of education. It's to draw out.
And it's the whole purpose of Shapeshifters is to really bring together these ideas in science, humanities, art, philosophy, and education. And we know, both of us know for sure, this is what is usually done in the classroom.
Yeah.
It's just that when a student goes into a classroom, it gets so compartmentalized, they may lose the idea of these interconnections.
Yeah.
That's why we came up with the I6, because it's a connecting link in this context.
Yeah.
I think we're getting our
Sparky's on our case.
we're 2 minutes over right now, and
Yeah,
it's getting a little
Sparky's.
Nancy.
Yeah.
And
He wants to get lunch.
I think he does. I'm not sure about
Should we buy him lunch?
why. Now that you said it, Stu, we're stuck. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next time. And I think I'm up next time. Am I not?
Yes. Good luck, folks.
I may not be as good as this one over
Yeah,
here.
but folks, I
So-
want you to know when Tony comes up, forget about the whole thing about anger. In fact, just forget.
Next time.
Bye.
Bye.